All right. Welcome to another panel discussion for today. Hope you all had a nice lunch session. Just as a side note, if you have any questions, just raise your hand. It's supposed to be an open dialogue between all of us. We'll be sharing our views, but would love to hear your comments and questions. So, yeah, we are here to talk about can CDMOs actually live up to the expectations? And what are the bottlenecks that are ahead of time, since there's so much of increase in demand and so much of capital being involved in GLP-1s. We will address some of those points today in our panel discussion. So we'll kick it off with a short introduction. This is myself, Abhay. I work with QYOBO. We are a market intelligence company based out of Munich. In essence, we put together data from different parts of the world in one spot and create actionable insights out of that. For procurement folks, this is about saving money and securing your supply chains. And for BD guys, this is about growing opportunities. So we'll pass it on to Rob.
I'm Rob Geiger. I'm VP of Business Development for Lupin Manufacturing Solutions. I've spent most of my career in peptides. Started a CDMO back in 2007 called Ambipharm. And along that way, we worked with the FDA to put together guidances of taking what were recombinant peptides into synthetic. Saw those guidance get published, and then we also worked on generic insulin. And now I'm working for Lupin Manufacturing Solutions. We do building blocks, some API, but most recently we did get a GLP-1 drug approved. So we're focusing on peptide drugs. We've got a handful of those as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Thompson. I'm Business Development Director of Peptides from Sinopep. We are a Chinese-based company, probably one of the larger peptide producers in the world. Right now our focus is the generic APIs for the GLP-1 market. So right now we're gearing up for the launch of generic semaglutide in 2026 in some major markets like India and China. We're also a CDMO for peptides and oligos. Hopefully I can bring some perspective on the situation in China, at least as a foreigner in China.
Thanks. Hi everybody, my name is Andrew Good. I'm with Nova Molecular. We're a chemical manufacturing company in Sumter, South Carolina. We manufacture acetonitrile, support the semaglutide GL1 market as well as the oligo market and a handful of other markets. Looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Nieters. I'm the Senior VP Strategic Portfolio Development with CPC Scientific. Been in the industry now, peptide CDMO business, about 30 plus years. I know the panel earlier mentioned exenatide. I was actually still in the manufacturing side, making that peptide for Amylin back in the day. But CPC is a peptide and oligo manufacturer, again, very similar to Connor and Sinopep. We're based in China. We're also building a facility in Rocklin, California. It should go online by the end of 2026. That facility will be focused directly on peptides. And then just as a general, you may have seen an announcement as part of MedTide, CPC Scientific. We just had our IPO at the end of June on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange.
All right. Thank you. On the screen, you will see the agenda that we will try to follow in this panel discussion. We'll kick it off with the first one, which is demand versus supply of raw materials. So yeah, the GLP-1 demand and development is skyrocketing. The question is always, are suppliers really able to keep up with the pace? Are really able to meet the projected demand? And maybe I'll actually put Connor on the spot here and ask how does it look from Sinopep's perspective as an API manufacturer? And in general also China, how is the landscape developing for chemical suppliers?
At least from what I'm seeing in China, as a Chinese company, we don't have concerns about the supply of solvent or raw materials such as amino acids or reagents for making peptides. In China, I think they have the opposite problem. There's an oversupply of manufacturers for these things. Maybe the situation is different in the US or EU, but in China, we're not concerned about that. Maybe the only area we could have concern about supply chain is the purification resins for HPLC, which we're doing on a huge scale, obviously, for synthetic peptides. And maybe the other area we could see some supply chain risk is the plastic auto-injector pens. We are manufacturing generic semaglutide, at least we will be from 2026. And sourcing those pens is quite difficult right now. But in terms of solvent and reagents, we don't see any concern.
Just a bit, can you, does anybody have any further comments on the pens? Because that's a question that's come up of, we can have all the API in the world, we can have all the acetonitrile, but if we don't have any pens, how, other than, so does anybody have any context on the pens?
I mean, I would speak more to the API side and kind of echo Connor's comments about raw materials. Again, based in China, we do have access to a lot of those raw materials, so that's not a concern. Having the facility in the U.S. that will be going online at the end of next year, that is a discussion we're currently having of what will we source locally, what will we bring in from China. Again, there was good discussion this morning even about the tariffs and what impact that would have on raw materials and things like that. But no, that would be all I have. I don't not much on the auto injector side.
And I guess that's some of the motivation to try to get these into pills, as well. People commented earlier about the phobia of needles and storage, and people are taking it, they're traveling. It's hard to carry these products around as well to keep it cold. So I think, we'll start to see a lot more development on the oral side, which API suppliers love that aspect of it.
Rob, you mentioned acetonitrile as one of the key elements, which is a key constraint and also a topic of discussion. Since we have Andrew here, how do you see acetonitrile landscape currently?
Yeah, so again, China, U.S. is a little different. There's Nova's one of the only manufacturers here in the United States that actually produce the acetonitrile. What's manufactured here pretty much stays here. We don't do a lot of exporting. But as the GLP-1 market grows and the demand for acetonitrile grows, and then the uncertainty with the tariffs, there needs to be something kind of jumping into another point about regulatory with the reclamation of acetonitrile. So as this market's growing and then the oligonucleotide market explodes like it did a couple years ago with the COVID vaccine, we see a significant shortage in the acetonitrile market globally because of, with the acrylonitrile, whether it's crude or whether it's synthetic. So definitely some concerns with virgin acetonitrile moving forward, which is why, the EU currently is there's a number of pharmaceutical customers over there that are lobbying to allow the recovery and return of acetonitrile.
And just curious, in the U.S., how many acetonitrile suppliers are there?
There's a lot of suppliers, but there's only really 2 manufacturers of it. So Nova's we're the only one that does it synthetically, and then there's another company that also processes the crude from acrylonitrile, which is heavily tied to the plastics, to the auto industry. So it's a byproduct of the acrylonitrile. So as the economy dips or goes into a recession, less demand for acrylonitrile, which means less supply of the byproduct acetonitrile, which again has to be produced either synthetically or imported from India, China, Korea, Taiwan, those other countries.
So in the U.S., there's only 2 manufacturers, and where are they located? I mean, obviously you guys are one.
Yeah, we're in Sumter, South Carolina, and then the other companies down there in Texas.
And maybe a follow-up question to that, how much would that be in terms of the global market share? So how much of those 2 API manufacturers would be serving the entire globe?
The 2 acetonitrile manufacturers, with the folks in Texas are probably the largest. And then again, there's a lot of demand coming from Asia. Nova's not, we have enough capacity to support the market here in the States, but we haven't ventured overseas yet.
And Connor, you also mentioned about auto-injector pens. Maybe you can also shed a bit more light about, is it really a supply shortage, or is it a shortage on capacity of manufacturing auto-injector pens?
For the pens, so I think Novo Nordisk quite famously had a shortage. I think they had a shortage of Ozempic and Wegovy, and I think that was not because of the API. They have plenty of API. They just had a shortage of the injector pens. I think now that there are so many generic companies gearing up to launch SEMA, there's huge demand for it, and there's not that many suppliers. I think that's mainly because of intellectual property reasons. These are quite complicated devices. All of a sudden, a huge demand has arisen for these devices, and there's not that many companies positioned to have a device that could be approved in the US or Europe, and also have the manufacturing capacity to meet that demand, as far as I know.
Please, Winky.
One of the question is there are 6 approved manufacturers of the devices, the 6 global manufacturers, and if you count out Shenmue, Series, and one from India, there's 7 manufacturers. The IP challenge that these companies put on the suppliers, don't you think it's a non-tariff barrier for all the generic developers to get into GLP finished dosage forms? I understand like Novo or Lilly goes to Owen Mumford, they go into GLP-1 for the rest of the guys, SGS, Scandinavian guys, and they can basically buy the capacities up, and they can make multiple products using different types of injectable devices or cartridges, which then forbids the generic company to come into that. So will that not be a crucial supply chain disruption of raw material for any generic company to get into the GLP space, even if they get the approvals?
Yeah, I think that's true. For sure, Lilly and Novo can go up and buy as much as they want from certain suppliers, which leaves not that many suppliers for the generic players. Is that your point?
No, the question is that the cost of them is hardly anything, $1,400 for 1,000 injections. That's not a huge cost, but the IP challenge that they put on the generic companies is far more challenging, and that would leave far more, I would say, a risk mitigating factor for getting generic companies into the GLP space. You will have the market open, but you may have an approved product, but you may not get any supplies at all. And how do you think generic companies will counter that?
You mean for the IP situation around the injectable pens? Yeah, that I'm not sure about. I mean, there are more companies coming into this area now with new devices, but these things take a long time to get approved. So that could really hamper the generic producers coming to market next year, or at least trying to come to market. I'm not sure how they're dealing with that, to be honest.
Because the FDA guidance says use a device that is compatible with the innovators.
Yeah,
First
yeah,
that they say is use a device that is compatible with the innovator.
yeah.
But if I don't have access to the innovator, then what is it? I'm like running with my hands and legs tied.
Yeah, that's
How
true.
do you think, as an API supplier, can you address that, or your customers will address that deficient part of the system?
Yeah, our customers are trying to address that by working with some suppliers in China. But definitely you're right. A lot of the supply has been bought up by Novo or Lilly, some other pharma companies. It's really the main challenge right now, I think. But exactly how they're dealing with that, I'm not sure. They don't tell me.
And the same is still even not from a generic standpoint, even on the new GLPs that are being developed and intending to go that strategy is what are they going to do from a drug product formulation? And I think a lot of them are looking to China to utilize that and supply that from that perspective.
So China becomes a key puzzle solver for the whole thing.
It could be one, yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think along those,
No, on it could be one. I just wanted to circle back on that comment. So I mean, yes, we all talk about supply, demand, and what's happening with tariffs and so forth. As CPC Scientific, how do you see this as a landscape that is developing for you and your company? What are the challenges that you see, and what are the good things about it that you see?
From a tariff perspective, or
Yep.
from in general, again, I think the panel earlier discussed this a little bit about how are tariffs going to impact China versus U.S. or Europe, and that's part of our general strategy anyway. In diversification is to build the facility in Rockland, California. I think that gives you a lot of options, whether or not it's making the material here in the U.S., whether you're even doing a hybrid approach, right, where you're maybe synthesizing the crude. And bringing that over and doing the downstream processing in the U.S. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. From a true tariff perspective, I think it's kind of a wait and see, right? I don't think right now the tariffs are impacting. I still think when we look at it and you look at our costs and what our customers are seeing, the tariffs aren't still impacting our ability to sell into the U.S. And U.S. companies are comfortable from that, knowing that we still have probably changes that are going to come from a tariff perspective, and kind of waiting to see how that plays out.
And how is that landscape for Lupin then looking like, Rob? So
Yeah, I mean, it's always that hurdle to get through that first PIN approval, because a lot of work goes into that. But then, you have your supply chain established. But then the concern becomes, I think everybody's aware of what happened with Catalent. They were purchased primarily for the contract manufacturing piece to be dedicated. But what happens if that happens with a PIN device company and you remove one of the few from that as well, and then it gets dedicated to whether it's Lilly or Novo or anybody, working from that standpoint, then, again, all this work really becomes a challenge, and people scramble because you may have invested millions of dollars into your PIN assembly device that's dedicated to that PIN, and then if that company is bought up, then you've got to start back over, and that's you don't want to lose any time on the generic. And that's kind of the that's what we're trying to bring from this panel is thinking outside these other areas of, even back to the acetonitrile. If disaster strikes in Texas, I remember there was a flood, and I got a picture when I was running quality of this pipe that was exposed and says, we're shutting down acetonitrile. And that sent us into a panic 10 years ago before this whole rush. And then it was like, well, we got to have a backup plan. So we had 3 suppliers where, one was the top tier. That's how we met Andy, and, he helped us through that crisis. But again, a hurricane blasting through Texas would be disastrous for this industry.
This is also the kind of news we track with the QYOBO platform. We see that there are so many things happening around the world. Unfortunate events, but they do happen, and the supply chains are vulnerable. The question is also how quickly can CDMOs actually adapt to such market events?
I can take it from a raw material standpoint, at least. We've done a lot of work, and even just over the years, Rob, to your point, the acetonitrile has had these several occurrences over the last 20, 30 years of supply disruptions, and you've worked through opportunities or other options, right, to consider. Obviously, synthetic acetonitrile eliminates a lot of the geopolitical issues that have come up in the past, and so that is one particular option. But I think from our standpoint, to be able to respond to different markets or different things happening, one, it's a pretty simple strategy from a raw material. Everybody utilizes it, right? You qualify additional vendors that are in your system that you can work with. CBC has actually taken that a little bit further. We've actually made some strategic investments in some of our raw materials in China. So not necessarily backward integrating, that isn't part of our overall strategy, but being able to have access to those things if there is a shortage or if there is a limited access to certain raw materials to kind of help from that perspective. Again, we're going through the similar scenarios with the U.S. facility and that coming online in terms of how we're going to be able to respond to that, what makes the most sense with each of those raw materials. Because acetonitrile is different than amino acids or some of the other reagents, right, in terms of what your strategy may be and what makes the most sense, including all of the current geopolitical climate and other activities.
I'm going to turn some questions to you, if that's okay.
No.
Obviously, with your service, you put together nice scores for CDMOs for everybody to look at, and it's real-time data. In your calculations, where does it factor into, like, potential supply chain disruptions, or is that part of some of your analyses as well?
Yeah, at QYOBO we look at supply chains through raw materials up until the MA holders, and we look at it from multiple fronts. So from compliance perspective, from finance perspective, from any event that is happening on the globe which is going to affect the supply chain, right? Any geopolitical tensions or whatever that is. We do see that this is something which is happening more and more nowadays, and also with discussions like tariff and so forth, we get a lot of requests that, hey, what would be if this supplier is actually acquired by this company and so forth. So these are the questions that we get every day in, day out. But at the end of the day, the question is always, okay, if these companies are impacted, who can serve the market still? Who else can actually come in and then fill the gap which is going to be created? Yeah.
So can people come to you that if they've been working with the supplier and it's not working out, that you can recommend here's the other company to take a look at?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we already flag the companies which could be a risk for them in terms of compliance or anything else. And at the same time, the platform would also flag you some of the alternate options that you could actually reach out to and get in touch with. So it's a very objectifying view, just purely based on data, not something that we do it as biased, but it's just what the data says.
But then when, we went through that exercise and we had certain things, we said, why not? And we predicted 2 companies and which both of them fell on the sword. And so it was like amazing.
It's just surprising that there is so much of data out there, but it's really poorly used, and this is what we're trying to do with all the publicly available information, trying to create some alerts and give you some heads up that this could be something which is you should be looking for. Was there a question? Yeah.
Yes, probably I'm going to switch the topic a little bit. I want to go back to the supply and demand. So, probably we know it's public information. I'm going to talk about the Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, they invest a lot in their own API manufacturing. And my question is, when their API manufacturing site are up running, how that impacts CDMO business, peptide API business landscape in terms of CDMO?
You want me to start? It's a good question. I think the way we look at from our CDMO and the work that we're doing and the customers we're working with, obviously the generic is an important part of that, right? So from both semaglutide and tirzepatide, we're looking at to develop both of those products, commercial filings, work with customers or generic customers who are working through that. But the other part of that side of that industry is all the other GLPs that are being developed, right? And that's where really we're focusing probably a little bit more. Again, I don't want to distract. We are doing generic semaglutide and tirzepatide, but we're really focusing on the other GLPs that are coming online. They're in various stages of clinical development. We're supporting over 10 different GLP type of projects. So from that standpoint, we're not concerned from there. From both a raw material, from a supply, from our business, we don't see that as overall impactful.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think we haven't had any concern about that once Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk come, on a much larger scale. I don't think it'll impact us in terms of solvent or raw materials or anything like that.
Now, at the same time, there are probably other CDMOs that would, right? But from CBC's perspective, we're not concerned from that standpoint.
Maybe the US or EU-based CDMOs would have more concern, but being based in China, I think we're more far removed from whatever Lilly and Novo are doing.
Yep.
So yeah, I think for us, there's no concern.
Question?
Please.
Yeah, sure. What's interesting to me about this market, it's already well known that Lilly and Novo have most of the market and they retain most of their supply chains in-house to the extent that they can. What's interesting to me is not the generics knows so much, and as the other novel GLPs that are being developed. It's this rise of Roe and Hims and all these smaller compounding pharmacies. Can you comment and talk about that supply chain or that customer base?
I can. I was actually having a conversation with somebody following that panel this morning. I think that's still to be played out. I do think that you're seeing some of these companies really focus on more of compounding, but I'll say just more even as a supplement, even developing their own. So they're actually looking at a GLP or at least a GLP analog of really to develop their own supplements and how that's going to impact this overall. I think that's why it's kind of a race, and that's why these topics of GLP Mania and can people keep up, and because all the CDMOs from both API and probably drug product as well are all they're getting this flood of requests to develop things, whether it is a supplement or whether it is a pharma business. It's something that we're very careful to enter into. Being a pharmaceutical company, that's what drives our business. We tend to focus on those. But there is a big hole, if you will, from those sort of companies looking for API supply.
And with the HIMSS, that's a really fascinating story. One thing we're trying to do with this GLP-1 panel is discuss some of the recent events from what happened from last year. And first we're like, oh, we've got like 20 things, then 50 things. And I mean, it's quite amazing. Every week, if you looked on LinkedIn, there's something that almost makes your jaw drop. And, we had fun texting back and forth. We saw what happens with HIMSS. We thought they would just go out of business with Novo dropping them. Out of nowhere, they buy a peptide manufacturing facility.
Yep.
And if I was asked to advise somebody, nothing against that site, that would not have been the site that would have bought to be able to supply GLP-1 or semaglutide. I mean, it's a beautiful facility right beside Facebook, but it's not large-scale manufacturing. And I think a lot of people are still scratching their head of what was that strategy to purchase that facility, because it's not bringing in very large quantities, or are they utilizing their Chinese piece and then just shipping final product and having it really kind of as a store, for him. So it's, that's a whole nother fascinating dynamic. And then the fact they were told stop selling it, and they throw some vitamins in it, and guess what? Now they're back to, selling a lot of this product.
It is interesting too. One of the things we're seeing, we get requests probably several times a week. And it's unlike any other peptide therapeutic that I've seen out there, where they're requesting, hey, we want a gram. It is just John Q has a shop that he's opening up and wants to buy a gram of semaglutide or tirzepatide or whatever. It is a constant flood. So we're spending a lot of times even qualifying customers and client base, and what are they really doing with it from that perspective. And of course, now it's even expanding. You can even move beyond. The one you can't get away from is BPC 157, right? It's the other peptide you continuously see on social media, but it has a very similar impact and what we're dealing with a lot.
And along the lines of supply chain and compounding pharmacies, it seems like nowadays a lot of people are very comfortable taking what they call tirzepatide or semaglutide. I'm just looking at the rest. What do you guys think? I mean, do you think this API is coming from legitimate sources, or should you ask for the C of A before you poke yourself?
I'm just assuming that the other larger CDMOs and CMOs are not supplying to those companies. So I think they're left to source from other options. I don't think CPC is the only one that has that as their business model, right, to not supply that. So my guess is that they're getting it from other places that maybe aren't regulated.
Maybe from a solvent supplier, Andrew, how do you see this?
Well, I mean, we're trying to do the same thing that everybody else is doing with diversification of the raw material. So whether it's synthetic or whether we're making it from crude, whether we're supplementing that demand and importing, or whether we're doing a recovery and return, we're trying to keep up with that as well with the diversification.
Speaking of key critical solvents and substances, there's one question, because we talked about acetonitrile quite a few times. Why is the recycled acetonitrile still off the table?
I don't have those answers. That's probably somebody to talk to on the FDA. But I think the EU is a little bit further ahead for recovery and return than the U.S. But a lot of our customers, they don't. If it's if the acetonitrile is 99.99%, it's not that. It's what is that 0.01%, and if it's consistent the whole time, that's what they want, is the consistency. If there's other impurities in it, or that fluctuate and change, that creates downstream issues with their process as well.
The process is there, right? I've worked with Novo Molecular even prior to Andy joining. The process is there. It can be recycled. It can be reused. There's some strategies being discussed about maybe you do it for initial purification, but you use fresh for ending. But again, until you have a significant motion and enough to where I'm gonna have this one large process that's making metric tons, and I'm getting all my acetonitrile from there and being able to recycle it, I think people are very hesitant to move forward with a strategy of using recovered acetonitrile.
Yeah, we do with other solvents and support other industries with that, with a recovery and return and segregating that and making it a closed loop system. It's just not. It hasn't passed the FDA yet, so. Hopefully in the future.
Yep.
What about the idea that obviously semaglutide to use it for weight loss, but the off-label use of it, right? How do the regulators look at that, to use it rather than for its initial indication? I think was initially for diabetes, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm gonna have to. I mean, again, I'm a drug substance manufacturer, so I don't. That's part of our qualification of clients, right? Why we're not selling to a lot of the requests that we do get. But in terms of off-label use, somebody else would have to
Yeah,
address
I mean,
that.
my neighbors ask me, they're like, can I take Wegovy and Ozempic either, in exchange, and what's the difference? And unless I'm missing something, I mean, the API is the same, and obviously we're seeing, rebranding, but I think even beyond, I mean, I think the weight loss indication is there. It's been off-label for many years. I think what we're going to start seeing is the use for alcohol addiction. People say it's going to be, hard indications approved, but I think that's the general of losing weight as well. But I think we're going to start seeing more and more of these creative, indications for off-label. And so somebody may not want to lose weight, but they just can't stop drinking. So they're going to just start taking it, and benefit to the side is they will, lose some weight as well.
I've heard it's also used for things like antidepressants, like with people with mental disorders, that semaglutide is starting to get traction in that market as well.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the big off-label. I think we're past the weight loss. I think that's happening, as it is. And you submit your insurance. If they say, no, you're not pre-diabetic, then, hopefully your insurance will cover it for, obesity. And if not, then if there's a addiction or, a mental issue, that could possibly push it through. Which that opens up a whole different discussion on insurance and PBMs and all that. But, it's just a fascinating story of nobody saw this 10 years ago. Of course, we did, because we were, making the API for these innovators, but that was for diabetes, and, started to hear whispers of the weight loss benefits.
Thank you.
Please.
Question for the green chemistry adoption rate, especially in your SPBS, when you recommend the green solvent for your customers, and I'm wondering what's the adoption rate, because right now DMF, we talk about DMF, this one, I just want to know your insight about the customer adoption rate for green solvents.
You want me to start? You guys are defaulting here. I would say at this time, it's a fairly low adoption rate from our clients. I think we have a lot of discussions about it. It's something that comes out in those initial kind of detail proposal, right? They want to know, what are your options? What can you do? But when it comes down to kind of a cost, that's where you tend to see a little bit of a blink and a pause, and they'll start with the current process as is. The one thing that I look at from a green chemistry, right, that's an all-encompassing principle, right? There's 12 different principles listed under green chemistry, and a lot of them are solvent, recycle, recovery. There's a lot of things you can do before you have to then just switch your chemistry. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying there's a lot of different aspects of green chemistry, and that could be a change out of a solvent, that could be recycling it, that could be increasing yields, lowering how much reagents you're using. So there are a lot of things that I think all CDMOs are working on towards that green chemistry, but it's not the same. And to what I think some of the clients are asking about, and some of the regulators are, how do you remove DMF? How do you remove TFA? How do we get those out of the processes? They mentioned some this morning. I think we all have developed technology that is available, but not at scale and not at the same cost at this point.
But staying on that green chemistry thing, I mean, basically, when you all are making generic Sinopep or something like that, you're going to be competing against each other. And there has to be some differentiating business factor. And you could go to, like, Zephyr, for instance, did the liquid phase and some fragment strategies, as well as solid peptide chemistry. Are you guys in the generic space going to be looking at superior processes, whether it's using different solvents, the regulatory burdens, whatever, or going with some of these combined strategies or hydrophobic tags? Are you just going to try to slam it in and get it on the market and take your share of the pie, or are you actually going to try to outcompete the chemistry that Lilly and Novo develop and outcompete your competitors in the generic space with superior science?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that. At least at Sinopep, the priority is getting the drug as quickly as possible. I think we have a process that's comparable in efficiency to Lilly, although you can't know that for sure. But trying to get something that's significantly better than theirs is not a priority at all. We're cost competitive anyway without trying to be green about it. And back to the previous question, we also have seen very low adoption rates among customers. You know, once you present to them a greener method, they see the cost is higher, they see that it's going to take longer to develop because it just complicates things to try and switch DMF or DMSO or whatever it is. They say no, and they go back to the default, traditional SPPS methods. So for us, we are developing some green chemistry methods in-house that we hope that customers will adopt in the future, but at least for the generic API, it's not a priority.
And if you've ever purchased a peptide, you know how many $1,000 per gram they are, and you hit the generic, and people want it under $100, per gram, and you can't get too creative, from that standpoint. And again, for a large generic company, like ourselves, you got to be first to market. Once you're first to market, you've established yourself, and you don't want to veer too far out of that. But it's going to be the continuous pressure of do you start to jump in as it drops below $300, $200? And again, I think a great service they offer. You can look and almost watch it like the stock market of what these API pricing look like as well.
Yeah, I think to echo that, once you have a process, once you have your DMF sorted and the FDA have looked at it and everything, you don't want to change anything. Maybe at some point if the price drops really dramatically, then you can try and get innovative, but at that point it's probably not even worth it trying to compete. So that's just the way it is in the generic market.
Do you think green chemistry can also replace or could be an alternative to solvents like acetonitrile and so forth? Is that something which you also look at as an advantage, and how do you also see that landscape for yourself, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what Tim said. I mean, we're really pushing for the recovery and return of acetonitrile, but again, whether it's DMF, where I believe there's only one manufacturer here in the United States, when we present alternatives to the solvents on a greener scale, there is price, the pricing is less competitive, and again, the customer has to change everything and then report back on the DMF, and it's not, the infrastructure that's set up here in America is not set up for greener solvents at this time.
We got last 5 minutes. We have to cover one key topic, which is small molecule versus peptides. And maybe a question to you directly, Connor, from my side would be, which drugs can actually steal the market share, as per your opinion, would actually replace peptides?
For the small molecule?
Yep.
So I guess everyone knows orforglipron by now. This is Eli Lilly's small molecule GLP-1 agonist. I think the key thing with orforglipron is the weight loss is just not that impressive. It's actually less than semaglutide. And a lot of people have kind of hyped it up as a way of solving the peptide capacity, or the lacking of peptide capacity. But actually, I don't think people will adopt this, as much as some people are predicting. It is oral; you don't have to inject yourself, but the weight loss is just not competitive at all with tirzepatide or even semaglutide. And on a API cost basis, milligram for milligram, the small molecule is much cheaper than the peptide, but the dosage of the small molecule is much, much higher. It's something like 300 milligrams per week, whereas tirzepatide is 10 milligrams per week. So any cost advantage having a small molecule versus a peptide, I think, is completely non-existent in reality. So I don't know. To answer your question, I don't think the small molecule GLP-1 agonists will take much market share away from the peptides, at least for now. Maybe in a few years if something much more effective comes along. But for now, I don't think it will change very much.
I just want to add some context, right? So I heard before about people being needle phobic, but when you take a look at it, only 15% of people in the United States are needle phobic. So, and when you're trying to calculate market share, you got to take that into consideration. The other challenge, right, with the oral is really the bioavailability, right? And that's why you have to load it up with 40 milligrams. But not only the bioavailability, also the variability, right? That's the other challenge. And then the other point, I guess, is just kind of a
sometimes that confuses people, right? Because peptides are in the small molecule class. Otherwise, you would have to file a BLA for it instead of an NDA or an ANDA.
Yeah, and
It's a fair point.
yep.
Yeah.
And I was a bit surprised when I saw, for example, the price on the Cure platform for naltrexone, which is like $5,000 per kilogram, while compared to semaglutide, which is $300 per gram. So it's a stark difference. And the question is always then, of course, we are talking about the US market, but what about the markets which are low-cost countries where actually the patients or the people cannot afford the medication? Will that still replace, will peptides still be the option of choice there, or will it move to oral drugs?
Yeah, and I think it's almost by default, we always say semaglutide and tirzepatide, but there's retatrutide and about 4 others right behind there as well that, you know, a lot of people are interested, and it's something, you know, to keep an eye on, because pretty much semaglutide's in the past, and a lot of people are putting major efforts on these new class, and it's always interesting of, you know, what's the difference, right? I mean, that's a question which comes up, like semaglutide or tirzepatide, and I think it was an important point if you were in earlier. It's each person, you know, responds differently, so it's good to have those options as well.
Some of the newer molecules are a little too modified, but what's the option of going back to recombinant, right? Because that can just save all the green stuff, but you guys are all synthetics, so is that, you think it's going to be a competition? Because they could go back.
And I think, you know, for us old timers with exenatide and liraglutide, I mean, a lot of people are looking back at some of those as well. They don't get all the attention, but, you know, Teva got their weight loss Saxenda approved.
I worked for 8 years on a needle-free exenatide and Lilly now, because we didn't think people like needles, but they just told people you could lose weight. They would have had it 10 years ago.
I'd be surprised if it goes back. I think they're going to continue to modify and adapt these peptides to, again, even that triple agonist that we were talking this morning, right, about. That's, I think you're going to see more and more of that development, not going back.
Any questions? We're about time. All right. Then thank you so much for listening. As a return gift, we actually have a white paper which you could download if you scan the QR code. This talks about API price developments, supply chain risks in GLP-1 space. Yeah, some of the other things which could really be exciting. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And thank you so much for your attention and participation.